I was born in Los Angeles, California, and was the youngest of 5 siblings, and younger by 7 years than my next oldest sibling. So I was the baby of the family, and it's as though I had 3 sets of parents, my two sets of siblings, and my mom and dad. My mom always referred to me as the dividend. It was the second honeymoon in Cambria, I think, that I was a result of. Somewhere between kindergarten and first grade, we moved to San Diego, California. My father was in the aerospace industry, and he got a new job down in San Diego. And so I really grew up mostly in San Diego. I loved going to the beach down there. I really found a second home at the beach and spent many happy hours in the sunshine, swimming and wave riding with my friends, and it was really a very sunny childhood. My mother was always very supportive of my writing, and she instilled in me very early, I think, a appreciation of literature through her reading to me of Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin and the poetry of Robert Louis Stevenson. I loved that, and I think that the sound of her voice and the rhythm of the poetry gave me an appreciation for the rhythms of that are possible in written expression, and so she's been very important in my life in encouraging that part of my expression. In San Diego, I went to high school and ran track like my father before me, and I excelled in track and was a star. Had broke the record, the school record in the quarter mile. I ran the quarter mile and the mile relay and the 440 relay. And I think I still have the record in the 440 relay, probably because it's now the 400 meters, so they haven't run it in so long. But that was one of the things that I got from my father. Another thing was the attention to detail and perfectionism that he had in his woodworking and in his photography. He was a very accomplished photographer, as is my sister Sue. And so I think there's something that I got from him of the visual sense in my poetry, and I've always been a visual poet. Well, when I graduated from high school, I really didn't have a clear idea of where I wanted to go to school, although I knew I wanted to stay on the West Coast, and I knew that I wanted to get away from Southern California and stretch my wings a little bit, and a friend had recommended Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, and so that's where I ended up going. And a number of important things in my life happened at Lewis and Clark. I became a student of Vern Ritsala, who is a poet, and he was the first real practicing poet that I had met. It was Vern Ritsala who really stood for me as an example of the fact that you can be a poet and it's a legitimate calling, and you can do it for the rest of your life. It's serious and it's fun at the same time. And the other thing that happened at Lewis and Clark is that I met my wife Kim there. Kim is the first reader of all of my poems, and she was from Portland, Oregon. And we shortly after graduating from college, we were married at her house. It was a 1978 very 70s wedding. I was wearing a Mexican wedding shirt and she was wearing a Mexican wedding dress, and we were married by our Eastern European literature professor. We met in his class, Eastern European literature class, and fell in love and were married after college. It was also at Lewis and Clark that I took an overseas study program, and we went to Scotland, a group of us English majors, And I further spread my wings there as a poet. I loved wandering around Edinburgh. I hitchhiked through the Western Isles of Scotland, and I just loved sort of being on my own and discovering myself as a poet there. So that was a tremendous experience. Before I had left on that trip, I had put in my suitcase an abalone shell from San Diego with the intention of presenting it to Salvador Dali, who was my hero, one of my heroes, and whose work I had discovered at the National Gallery. And so after we were finished with the program, I went to Spain and found his house in Port Lligat on the Costa Brava. And I was sitting on a wall above his house with the abalone shell in a plastic bag, and I didn't really even know if he was home or not. And the limousine was parked below me, and inside was Gala, his wife, and I didn't know that Dali himself was in the car until I saw a hand reach over and pat her on the thigh. So at that moment I realized that he was in the car, and the car started, and I had to do something. So I jumped down off the wall and pulled the abalone shell out of the bag and held it up to the windshield of the car, and he motioned me to come around, and his window rolled down, and I presented him with the abalone shell, and he said, "Thank you. It's very beautiful. You paint?" And I said, "No, I write." And he said, "You come visit me and the madame tomorrow at 7 o'clock. So the interim period between that first meeting and my visit with him was one of the most nervous times that I've ever had in my life. And I went the next day, the next evening to see him, and he graciously brought me into his home. I sat in his sort of living room area and watched him work on a wax image of Christ on the cross that was later to be cast in gold. And all the time he was answering the phone, receiving other visitors. Every so often he would get up and sign prints. He would ask me questions from time to time. I had brought him a poem, and he read the poem and said, "Bravo." So I was very pleased with that. I've almost forgotten what poem it was, but that visit was a milestone in my life and sort of further galvanized my relationship to visual arts. And it was just plain exciting to have the opportunity to meet my hero that way. I got my Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at the University of California at Irvine. And after I graduated, we were there still in Southern California, and I was doing temporary work in factories and warehouses, and this wasn't really going anywhere for me. And so we decided to go to Japan. So we got jobs teaching English as a second language to Japanese businessmen and government workers, and moved to Japan and lived there for a year and a half during 1983 and 84. And the Japan experience ended up having a significant part in my written output. I have a pretty good handful of poems that come from that Japan experience, and it was a way to really enjoy that culture, which we had always admired for its traditional culture and its gardens and its design sense, and really felt that we had gotten a lot out of that trip. I started out working with a friend, the artist Gary Groves. He came to a poetry reading that I gave down at Linwood Center. There used to be a bakery down there, and I gave a poetry reading that included my Japan poems. And he came to the reading. He had a Japanese wife, and he came up to me and said that he admired my poetry and spoke a little bit about his connection with Japan, and I ended up working for him, doing house remodeling, helping him remodel houses down on the south end of the island. And during our lunch breaks, we would talk about poetry and about art, and that exchange between the verbal and the visual expressions of art is something that I guess had been sort of brewing all through my life, and really came to a very gratifying fruition with my conversation with Gary, and it continues to this day. He's now a woodcut artist, and he and I collaborated on my chapbook, The Son We Had, which incorporates poems having to do with the passing of my father, also with the breast cancer poems. My wife was a breast cancer patient and is a breast cancer survivor, and that also takes a significant part of my work is devoted to that experience, dealing with her very serious encounter with breast cancer. I think that those three things, looking back from the very poor perspective of the present, the death of my father when I was 13 and the death of my mother a little over a year ago, and my experience, my relationship with Kim, the first reader of my poems, and her, especially her very serious encounter with breast cancer, those three things, with the sort of Kim being the fulcrum, are what go into that manuscript and stand for me as currently anyway, sort of mileposts in my life and experiences that have defined me as a person and as a poet. And what I get out of what I find is solace and redemption and exhilaration in the natural world. I'm a nature poet. If you had to pin me down, I would have to say I'm a nature poet. And in the world of art, in discussing art, relating my work to visual artists and projects that I've enjoyed with visual artists here on the island, including Patty Rogers, with whom I did a series of bookmarks and broadsides, incorporating her images and my poems. And I was also quite honored to be part of Maggie Smith's water mural that went up at the Bainbridge Aquatic Center. She asked me to contribute something, and a very, very tiny excerpt from one of my Japan poems ended up in that water mural. These conversations with visual artists are vital to me, and I think they sort of define my residence, so to speak, as a poet on the island. It's just that part of me that relates to the visual world.